Cool. Hello, everyone. So my name is Gabriel. I'm part of the websites team. So and essentially for websites, you can. So the vision of website is sort of like create this search tool that allows you to search the web like a database. And so I'm going to go into more detail what does that actually mean. But yeah, so that's sort of high level of what it actually websites what's to achieve. So if you think about like especially this is especially important whenever you actually have to solve really highly complicated queries. And an example of this is like some of the queries we have, for instance, is like I want to find electrical engineers working at a startup with a company that one of the founders has out a research paper about cell generation. That's one of the simple queries that we get from our customers. And obviously, to be able to solve these type of queries, you essentially have to like sort of search across the web base, across the web, but also sort of not only search, but also cross-reference multiple entities that exist in the web. And that sort of has these are complicated tasks that you usually what you end up doing is obviously you can use Google, you can use really LinkedIn, and what you end up doing is like I pull a big list of electrical engineers, and then I go through all the lists and then manually sort of review the companies and whatnot, and go through literally all of it. And so there's not really a search tool that allows you to like combine on runtime multiple entities across the web, and then actually verify that the results match what you're looking. So and then sort of the way you can think about websites within Excel, us building sort of search engines, is that it's sort of like I like to think about the number of searches that we do for every for websites as a product itself, for us as a product, and generally as a different products we have. So we have the search API. Obviously, it's a single search. And then the more the number of searches, the more compute, the more complicated queries we can actually solve. And so just to give you a ballpark numbers, is like obviously search is a single answer search, answer a couple of searches, research is actually 20 to 50 searches, and then finally websites we go into 1,000, so 10 to 1,000 after searches to actually be able to retrieve that list of results that you care about. And so that's sort of like a high level view of the context of websites. And so I'm going to just jump right into an actual demo. So if you think about the previous search we did, oh, by the way, websites is a product that is exposed into two different sort of modalities, the actual UI and the API. We also sort of support developers to actually develop things. And so it is just essentially is like you just throw in the actual sort of search query, and like the whole idea of sort of once we have a query, we need to understand what's actually happening, and that's sort of the computation step of the actual search query. And what's really important here is like we also care about like latency in the sense where we actually want to return a set of results in sort of like a fast manner. So there's also sort of like nuances in the way we decompose criteria so that we can actually parallelize as much as possible the actual sort of search and the actual verification of results. Anyway, so this is like a preview of the actual search that's going to happen. Eventually, you can think of websites as like a table of a list of results. So like before the preview, you sort of like double check the criteria decomposition. And you can always enrich every result with a set of data that you also want to find. You can think about either subsequent searches for the given result, etc. Just for the demo, I'm just going to go with just the normal search. Cool. Cool. So while it's running, I'm also just going to go a bit deeper into what's actually happening here in the hood. Well, cool. So in a high level idea, a given website search, we have sort of multiple steps, but the most important part of it is like we want to understand the query, what's actually happening, what does the actual user need to like, what is the perfect sort of set of results the user would want to receive. And that's sort of the query analysis and actually what the user wants to find, the actual sort of instructions for the subsequent agents to be able to verify the result, etc. And once we have enough understanding of the query, then we run into this like cycle that has three different phases. The planning, searching, and then grading. And all of that is sort of, you can think about sort of different agents running different steps of the actual search. Because of the sort of like the complexity of these queries, we have a variety of models of strategies of planning a given search, and every plan produces a set of queries, and all those searches, all those like plans that you produce a set of queries that eventually you want to run them all at once. And that's why I sort of added that diagram of searching being a single stage. Just because you can imagine whenever you're searching a lot of results, there's a lot of duplicates and whatnot, so you need to centralize somehow that amount of data. And finally, once you have the search, you push into grading, which essentially is like spinning up thousands of actually sort of agents, verifying every result set based on sort of the set of criteria that you really care about. And there's sort of like, you can imagine the pattern usually for grading is like these React-based agents are recursively searching into the tools, etc. So that's sort of a high level of what's actually happening. So maybe if we go back to the product, in this case, we found 2 matches so far. It takes a while, especially on the complexity of the query and how many hooks we need to actually do to validate a result. But for every result, we sort of like, so you can imagine the classic sort of reasoning of why that result matches, and sort of also references that just help you understand why that actually is like true or not. Cool. So while this is running, I also have some other brilliant searches that people have also done to show you sort of like the flexibility of the actual search tool. For instance, find finance professionals in New York City that are ex-Navy SEALs and studied at top school. And so as you can imagine, sort of, again, this sort of becomes sort of a multi-step search, a multi-hop search for every result to actually validate that is true. And we especially are really good at companies and people, but we also want to sort of expand to other entities. And another case for companies, for instance, is like hedge funds that use public web data for research and commodities and whatnot. So what you require, in order to solve this type of queries, you actually need to sort of, for every result, do subsequent searches and understand if that actually is matching or not. So like, it is sort of this multi-hop sort of pattern that is actually what we're trying to solve the most. Yeah, and I guess maybe also one of the sort of the things that we are especially sort of, we need to solve, especially at that scale, is sort of every website is a really spiky workload. So what does it mean essentially is like a single website can create thousands of searches, can create tens of gigabytes of data, and can run up to several days. Essentially, we have some searches that are like 100K results, so that in order to find 100K results across the web, that takes several days. So these type of workloads has sort of like driven us to build a set of functionalities to be able to actually do the searches. Some of them are, for instance, we sort of create these priority-based lanes for like the agents and the tool calling and whatnot to actually be able to sort of like not only prioritize set on customers' SLAs and whatnot, but also sort of like it is more important at the beginning of the search to be able to execute that and whatnot rather than the later part of the search. So there's like all these heuristics on when we actually sort of like have a limited amount of resources, how do we distribute that in the best possible way? And another big part of it is like, you can imagine that websites, just because of the sort of volume and the amount of like work you need to do for every search, we need a lot of elasticity and like the way we actually sort of deploy this type of workloads. And what that means essentially is like every stage is separated in its own worker pool, and that worker pool has to be sort of highly elastic, because one of the challenges is like not only handling the load, but also sort of like not creating any backlog whatsoever. Every time you create any sort of like a room for any backlog, this just grows really quickly, and so you end up having a hard time to actually sort of like drain it out. And so that's one of the sort of like challenges, I guess, in running this. And yeah, finally, obviously, like we're running billions of tokens per day, and so that means that you cannot actually sort of like serve in a single provider. And so that essentially means sort of you have to build a sophisticated way of like multi-provider routing, region fallback, multi models, etc., to be able to like deliver that amount of tokens per second that we actually sort of like serving. And yeah, this is sort of like high level, like what are the big challenges there. Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. Obviously, if anything here that excites you and you think it will be cool to work on, you can check out the careers or reach out to me afterwards. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, happy to answer them.
Ooh, thank you so much, Gabriel.
Great.
Oh, did you have a question? Yeah.
How do you determine if something is like relevant or not, and where have you found that kind of stuff?
On whenever we want to like validate if like something matches in a given result,
Yeah.
scope result. I think there's like we sort of build certain heuristics on like what we know. They're like canonical good sources of information that we can sort of use whenever a criteria and requires that information. Let's say financial data, we know there's a specific set of canonical domains that have higher quality data than not. And so we use that as a way to like drive that sort of like edge cases. But there's no, obviously, the more like sophisticated or like varied the criteria is, the harder it is to sort of find what's relevant or not. So just we sort of especially optimize for like the cases that we sort of have the most usage, it's financial data, people data, or whatnot, that actually is easy to find a specific domain that actually works.
So you're not using like language model?
Language model?
You're not using like the LLM at all?
Oh yeah. So we are, yeah. So I guess the thing is like, imagine you get a result, you need to evaluate with the LLM, and then LLM has to also search secondary sources to actually validate that thing matches.
Oh.
And so like that secondary search has to also be driven by something that could be authoritative to actually be able to like use as reference. And that's sort of like what I was referring to, like different heuristics for that. Cool. Thanks.
Okay, one more question. Sorry. So with websites specifically, so one's obviously hallucination, etc. What about recency? So how recent? Like, can I pull up news articles from today? Because I'm sure Exa is doing some background work to prepare it for websites.
Yeah.
So what's the latency?
Yeah. We're building on top of our Exa index. So the recency of articles and whatnot is as most recent as we can on our index internally. And so that is in the orders of like minutes, depending on what sort of like data sources like news articles and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think people data is a bit more tricky because the way to retrieve it and actually crawling and whatnot, it gets more complicated and like refreshing is a bit harder.
Yeah.
But on things like articles, I think it's like pretty cool. Yeah. You.
Thank you, Gabriel. That was pretty cool. Next, we have Manmohan, who's a principal technical product owner at PG&E, and will share insights on running AI in multi-cloud environments inside one of the largest utilities in the US. I'll just take this laptop and you can just check it. So
while you are setting it up, just want to understand here if any of you are working with a large company. Have you seen any? Okay. So are you already using Gemini? Yeah. Okay. Maybe you can relate what I'm going to talk to you. But maybe you guys can also relate if you're not working, but you're dealing with the multiple clouds, because that's kind of a trend right now. So, just. I'm sorry about that.
you want to turn it that way?
Yeah, let's see if I can. Okay, all right. Yeah, so the topic that I want to talk about is obviously AI gateway, and the topic we are talking about is report heap. So before I start, this is about me. So I'm working at PG&E, but I'm not the official person on speaker of PG&E. So most of what I'm talking about is most of like my views and my ideas that we are trying to implement at PG&E, right? So this is about my introduction. Obviously I have worked in IT a lot. I have played different roles. Before PG&E, I was working at AWS, and I was working. My customer was Amazon, and I was working on this generative AI when the boom started, and all cloud companies start working on the generative AI product. I was working and evaluating the product, taking it to Amazon, looking into the use cases, providing feedback to the AWS product team when it was not even named Bedrock, right? So this is my experience, and then now with PG&E, I'm the technical product owner for the cloud CUE. So when I joined, we were just working with the AWS, and we start expanding into Azure. We are looking into other cloud, and I'm seeing multi-cloud is gonna be the future, right? And multi-cloud is not new to me. When I was working with Albertsons, I worked with multi-cloud there also. But that time, probably I'm seeing the trend is changing. So how the multi-cloud happened that time, and now how it is happening, technology has changed. So what I want to talk about is how we can deal with at the enterprise level. What is the role of the AI gateway, which is basically centralized AI gateway, and what problem is trying to solve, because we are looking at AI gateway as the central point of control, right? It's a central point of governance. And I just mentioned over here AWS and Azure, how well it integrates. That's kind of the feature that we looked at from the quality perspective. And the business benefit that is coming into, the AI world is evolving. There's a lot of unknown cost, which is most of the big enterprise will look into first. And even though any cloud service seems like we are starting with the low cost, but when the usage happens, So the cost increase. So do we have that control? So if you know about Cloud Center of Excellence, there is a function called FinOps, and FinOps plays a role where they want to understand what the budget of your application is, how you're controlling it, and that's what the another point for this benefit. And obviously, how you can accelerate innovation in your company, where you're being a developer, not thinking about infrastructure, not thinking about the framework every time, not thinking about the cost which is going out of control. So this is kind of the executive summary. I will go into detail a little bit just to talk about, because many people might have question about a why multi-cloud, right? So the big enterprise, they always look into multi-cloud. There are a couple of things that see, you might have heard there was outage in AWS a couple of years back in one region, and the discussion is started. Should we think about another cloud? Because if one cloud is not going to be resilient, maybe my application should run in another cloud. So resiliency, the flexibility, not getting logged into one single vendor, better negotiation power. There are like several reasons why a company might think into multi-cloud. So multi-cloud is going to be the future. We cannot avoid it. Now, it comes with some challenge, right? So every cloud you need to run. You need to have developers who understand the cloud separately. They can build applications understanding those services. And then governance issue, and obviously you need to have some control of the cost. It's not related to generative AI at all. It's like overall cloud cost that we're talking about. And obviously, the integration, compliance from the enterprise, cybersecurity compliance, risk management, all those come into the use. When it comes to AI, so scaling brings the cost in. So how we optimize the cost when we scale. Now, this is what I joined PG&E, it's about 11 years, and I was told let's start building the AI gateway. When I start talking to the team there, every team has their own definition of what AI is, how they are thinking, because they were looking one product from one vendor, another product from another vendor, and they were solving some specific use cases using AI. They thought that's AI, right? Vendor was saying AI agent, and they're saying if I just get the agent, everything underneath working magically, and my solution will start working right away, right? And when they got into detail, they understood now how much work I have to do to make this AI agent work for my use case. So I took this slide, and you can see which I got this image from. At some point, I came from Google. I was working with AWS at that time. So this one I used to make sure some of my team members, not my team members, other teams, they told me hey, I have a use case. I just need access to LLM. I know Python and I can build Gen AI application. I said, no, you need to understand what else is required. So this is a slide I used to tell them, hey, and I will put their YouTube clicks here. I just want to say that because I want to tell them, you think about prompt design, you think about guardrails, you think about toxic content that you might send or receive. Then you need to think about your vector store, how you handle PI data. Data collection means when you start working on data, then obviously you need to think about do you have the right data for your use case. If you don't have, then you start going back and start building the right data. So all these things, I will just go quickly here. And now what happens here, we are just talking about, it's a foundation. With the FinOps is one of the block here. And how you do the observability, you're logging and monitoring your application, AI application. Now, if I talk about the advanced use case, which is more agentic actions that you want to take. So now it becomes like a foundational layer that you build. Top of that, you can build the agents. And I start seeing there were use cases will come related to edge computing, IoT, which is kind of one of that I'm already working on, right? So I expected that, and that's come, and then that time nobody knew what SLM is. I said the time will come when we start talking about fine tuning, and we need to start working on fine tuning the small language models. So then I put it into a bigger block like this, just to tell my management, And this was like really lagged by my management. One of my director, they made it a puzzle game out of it. So they took this picture, made a puzzle game, gave it to the people, and asked them to put them together to understand what all the dependencies we have for the building the AI framework or AI platform in the in our organization. So, so with this, when I was talking about looking at those different blocks, now one team cannot do it. We need partnership involvement from other teams. We need to put them on the same mindset, and we need to start thinking about building an AI platform. So when I was talking about AI platform, these were the things that I said, okay, now we understood what are dependencies, but let's look into how we can build that foundation. Now we are talking about different components of building AI applications. If you see here, the security and governance, which goes very high, at least the enterprise like PG&E, we think about security first. We always talk about safety. If you attend any PG&E meeting, the very first thing we'll talk about the safety. Like where you guys are, I would have started with that, right? So where you guys are sitting, if something happens here, right? Let's say earthquake happens, do you guys know where to go? Do we have someone who can tell, hey, this is the exit, this is what you have to do, maybe you can hide, you can do. So we talk about that. So we always talk about the safety and security. So security is one, prompt management, people don't take it very seriously, but this plays a big role. So if you're already working on generative AI application, you know that. Agentic workflow, which will come later on, but we are talking about which framework we can use, how we can improve the performance, are we monitoring it. We probably want to have multi-model because one model may not work for the use case. Single application might work on multiple models. And you guys probably already see like LLM as a judge, for example. Very simple, but powerful use case where we use multiple LLMs. Guardrails, we probably want to protect our data, which is going to the LLMs. We want to have visibility into it. We want to protect any prompt injection on any other risk with the guardrail. LLM ops, which nobody was thinking, and I was saying, okay, you need to look into how you are going to build your application and deploy to production. Because until you deploy to the production, it doesn't mean what you're developing, right? So, and then integration with the other frameworks. I talked about AI infrastructure. In my mind, I have GPU as a service that probably down the line, I don't want to depend on one vendor for providing the GPU for my fine-tuning requirement. I should have a framework where I can just look into multiple vendors and choose the GPUs which are coming very cost effective, right? So all these things I can tie with AI gateway. Now, this is what you see here. I say if we start looking into AI gateway and think that how these things are tying together, then I can build the foundation for my development, and then I can think about path to the production. That should actually give my developers, they should not think about what is the infrastructure I'm choosing, what is the framework I'm choosing. Maybe they already have a set of guidelines. They just think about the application code, commit to the GitHub, they deploy on the production, and rest of the things are taken care by the framework. So now the centralized AI gateway, this is the question I've been answering. In my company, I have answered, what is the benefit of this? Now, centralized AI gateway, I will talk about provide the strong centralized governance across all AI initiatives. So what was happening, every company was coming, not company, like every team was talking about AI solution, which is good. Usually talking about every team is very excited to bring AI solution. There are some of the vendors solutions, some of the homegrown solutions they were talking about. But then the internal process, maybe every company has that. We need to have access to AWS account. We need to build. So we want to is that layer saying that you have access to LLMs through AI gateway. Now, once you go through it, I can understand all the calls going out of my organization to all the LLM providers. So I have a single entry and single exit point. Now I don't need to worry about if you having the application silos and I have no visibility what you're sending, what you're getting, and one day I see some risk, maybe some exposure happened and we never knew, right? the unified guardrail that makes us the capability that I'm protecting my AI application prompts, the data they're trying to send. So we had multiple layers of guardrail. I can use, if I talk about portkey, like the portkey has a guardrail, I can use portkey guardrail. I can put up that I can Bedrock guardrail. I can use Azure guardrail, and I can put in layers. If one guardrail for some reason doesn't work, I have another guardrail, maybe another guardrail. So that defense in depth you can build. AI budget control I talked about. This is pretty important, right? I mean, if you, in my experience, I see most of the time we spend in development. We probably make a lot of calls in development. And in a larger organization, I think, or maybe any organization should think about, hey, can I control the cost in development itself? Maybe you are trying to build a use case, and I can say, okay, I have got only 10K for this use case, and a month, let's see if you can do in this. So it gives the mindset to developer, yeah, I'm not just because I have access to LLMs, I'm not just overspending. I'm thinking, choosing the right LLM. I'm looking at the cost also. I'm looking into the capability of the LLM, and then I'm thinking which LLM is going to suit well for my use case with the less cost, or should be a cost effective. A quick check on that. So okay, so I will go fast here. Obviously, there are other benefits here from the organization perspective. Now, this is what the slide I put here as the platform. So if you look at this. I put all AI gateway is kind of a central here, which I want my organization to have the unified guardrail practice, unified prompt, and then the unified way of accessing the LLM. So AI gateway is providing that layer. That data layer is there, which basically the thought here that don't try to segregate data at one place. That I should be, or my application should be able to reach out to data wherever it is. And fine tuning, LLM ops, governance. And the innovation, which is AI POC centered, more like the innovation, because as the new technologies are coming in, the team should be able to innovate with the latest model, new framework, and all that. So this is kind of the framework, and that should build how we provide no-code tools. We can probably build the enterprise level chatbot, self-service catalog, and all other things. Now, here is where you use AI gateway. Obviously, I can use any of the LLMs. For the data layer, I have different data sources that I can think about connecting to my data. And these are all different framework and product which are in the mind, in the thinking to build out. But these are the options that could go into each of these pillars here. This is if you're not thinking about AI gateway, probably there are some risk here. And I mentioned I'm not going to go through this one, but mainly that if you're not thinking about AI gateway, probably you are going to have a risk of not innovating things, you're not scaling, and it's not me saying it, right? This is a report from McKinsey. McKinsey has already said that they researched or they surveyed over 150 companies, and they came up with this report. So now these are two architecture. They presented two different reports. So if you see this architecture, and maybe I will just put it here, you see that LLM gateway, which is another way of calling AI gateway, and AI gateway service in both. One is the banking architecture, right, and other is they surveyed across and they got this common different architecture. Both architectures are using AI gateway, right? So with that one.
Just for sake of time, maybe we continue the conversation on the panel.
Okay.
That's okay?
This is my last slide.
Okay,
I'm
great.
done.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So Portkey is an AI gateway. We essentially are the production platform for enterprises. It was super cool to hear from Manmohan because I think within startups, we have a lot of this glitz and glamour about LLMs. But when you actually go to enterprise, I think that is a very different story altogether. If you're walking around the city, I see these nice manual covers, all of them say PG&E. And you would never imagine the kind of AI use cases an enterprise like PG&E is developing. And they've got like 10s and 20 such use cases that are going to production. So very cool to be working with enterprises like this and learning from them as well. One big learning for us at Portkey has been how MCP is really transforming how teams think about LLMs, AI agents, and data connectors. this has probably been, and it's strange, the number one request that's come inbound from all of our customers saying, what are you doing with MCP? What are we trying to do with MCP? And how this connects to every other system of ours. So I'm just going to talk about that a little bit, and would love to take questions after this as well. So this is essentially a reference architecture for an LLM app. I've distilled this down from Uber, Shopify, Spotify, LinkedIn. They all have their reference architectures. But this is the complexity of deploying something to production. You need a lot of these features to come in and really go be a stable production platform. And we have Rustam from Snorkel here, and you should definitely chat with him. They've built a lot of this production system as well. And it ultimately comes down to looking like this. Where if you think about it, this is the feature of building, and you have to get all of these other components in place to just be able to be stable in production. This is AWS's guidance on if you just want to do cost monitoring with LLMs on Bedrock, use these services. I love AWS, they're amazing, but I don't want to use 7 different services just to manage cost. Needs to be a better way. Obviously, Portkey, this is how we do it, where the AI gateway sits in the center. Your applications, agents, etc., can now seamlessly talk to 1,600 plus LLMs, 20,000 plus MCP servers, and the MCP servers is what's interesting, and I want to talk about that a little bit more. So, let's see how this works, right? So now the AI agents, and I'm preaching to the choir, you all know how AI agents work. The dumbest explanation of this is it's a for loop with tool calls and chat completions built in. But then you add reasoning and retrieval, etc. You've got this nice agent which can do a lot more than a simple chat completions call. The one core aspect of this which has always been a problem is I need to build my tools, and then when the LLM returns with a request, I'll make a data call. So I'll make a tool call out, and then it comes back in. That's what MCP completely solved for us. At Portkey last year, we were seeing so many enterprises building these tools internally, but this loop that happened is just painful. So MCP essentially solves that problem, where instead of having unique APIs connecting into the LLM or the LLM making these tool calls, you can now make these calls through MCP servers that are getting hosted either internally or externally by different companies. So Slack would have its own remote MCP server, which means now suddenly LLMs can directly access data that exists anywhere in your organization. Obviously, that comes with its own sort of risks. How do you standardize logging, governance, etc.? And if you go back to my previous slide, we solved all of this for LLMs. We're saying the same thing needs to be solved in a different way for MCP servers as well. So that's what we are essentially launching with Portkey. So we're doing 2 things. One is MCP connectors. Imagine sub-agents running directly on the gateway. So when the LLM returns with the tool call, can I use the MCP servers to make that tool call and return the result directly? So now when a request is create a calendar event for the LLM in production event for this time, when the LLM responds with a Google Calendar tool call, Portkey can make that tool call and then return the response, which is just lower latency, better production access, and governed production access. The other bit is, can I have all of my MCP servers listed in a single place? As an organization now, every developer wants access to add MCP servers into Cursor, into Claude, etc. But where am I getting these MCP servers from? How do I auth into all of it? Do I use Okta? Do I use my own API keys? That just becomes messy, and people don't end up using the MCP servers they should be using to improve productivity. And that's where MCP Hub comes in. And I want to show you how that looks with Portkey. So in Portkey, what we want to offer is a registry of sorts, where you can have all of the MCP servers within an organization listed in one single place. Now, I've added, say, the linear server, the Figma server, the Postman server. Instead of using mcp.linear.app, I could have mcp.mycompany.com/linear, which means I now have a central repo which I can give access to all of the teams that want to use MCP servers. This improves auth because I now have centralized auth in one place. I know I have governed access, and teams can very quickly discover tools. A large gaming company that's a customer of ours, they use Cloud Code very, very effectively. Now, their idea is, can we add all of the newer MCP servers we're building internally directly to my Cloud Code instance? So Cloud Code can access these MCP servers as newer ones come in, which means better productivity. My developers don't need to keep adding servers into Cloud Code or removing servers from there. And I have a centralized place to sort of govern and manage all of this. So that's sort of what we're building with Portkey. And now's sort of the moment of truth, and let's see if I'm able to show you how this works. So this is Portkey. I'm in my demo workspace. We've added this tab for MCP integrations. Connect to Wi-Fi.
Another Wi-Fi details.
Awesome. So now, on my Portkey workspace, I can add MCP servers. Is there an MCP server you guys use that I could just pick here to try? Or I'm going to add linear, because that's the one I've been testing on. So say, for example, I'm creating a new linear integration. We use linear very heavily at Portkey just to keep track of projects. And I can add linear's MCP remote URL. This could be an MCP server you're hosting as well, so we don't care really about where it's hosted, as long as we have an endpoint. I know this is an HTTP, a streamable HTTP server, and I'm just going to say this is OAuth automatic. I don't want to configure anything, let users configure it on their own, I don't really care. I'm going to say next, and I'm going to give this server access to my workspace. So any user in my workspace now can use this MCP server within their projects. This is it. This MCP server is now ready for use within my network in a very safe and secure way. And the way I do this is, for every developer, they get this list of servers available within the org. Instead of picking the regular linear URL, I pick the Portkey URL, which is a single place where a single endpoint for all of my MCP servers, and I can just start using this MCP server. Now I'm using the MCP inspector. If you use MCP, this is almost like the Postman for MCP today. So I can try this out, and I try connecting. So this now is actually authenticating me into my Portkey account because I have centralized auth for everything. I can say approve. Portkey did not have linear's permission, so now Portkey is just saying for the first time, approve this linear account. And now for every other time, I don't need to approve any of these applications because my user is already within Portkey. Sorry, let me try this. Perfect. So now I'm authenticated into linear via Portkey. And now every other time if I'm connecting Cursor or anything else, I just need to use this common URL that's common for my entire organization, but it's very user specific. Hoping I'm still able to connect now. Okay, yeah, this was what I was fearing. We connected to it, but I don't think I am really able to show you. What should have happened was tools would have loaded and I would have shown you a tool call happen. But essentially, the idea is a central registry for all your MCP servers. Devs get access and you can then use it within any of the applications that connect to MCP servers. So that's coming soon. We're in private beta, clearly, but we're going to fix this and go live soon.
Next, we have an interesting announcement / launch by the executive.
All right. Okay, so I'm Felix, and I have a quick presentation about our new product. I usually work on our web search retrieval, but we've been building a code search tool for the past couple months, so I'll just share about that. So earlier today we launched Execode, which is our new MCP for reducing hallucinations in coding agents. So why should you care about Execode? Well, if you imagine that your LLM never hallucinates and it uses any endpoint or function perfectly, this isn't currently the case. Currently, LLMs are pretty good at internal software, but they're not good at calling tools. And so Execode is meant to solve this. And so the hypothesis of Execode is that you can solve most hallucinations through a couple of code examples. And if you think about like code hallucinations, usually they're not fundamental things. They're simple errors, like an LLM mixing up a parameter, or using the wrong type of argument, or using the wrong function name. And so it's feasible to think that you can solve this with a few code examples showing like what the user wants to do. And so Execode is a retrieval tool focused on perfect retrieval of code examples. And so we've indexed, we use X as index of billions of documents, and we take out the articles, documentation, Stack Overflow posts like Reddit posts, and get all of the code examples out of those. And then the retrieval tool will rank these and find the perfect view for whatever coding task you want. And so what this gives you is a very effective context tool. And so you can see by the eval, and if you have questions about how the eval was made, I can answer them. But if you have perfect code examples, you have a really good context tool. And so this shows it outperforming other tools like Brave and even X's auto MCP for a code hallucination task. And so this, our interpretation of this is that code examples are super effective, and so Execode focuses on that. Also, if your question can't be answered by a code example, we'll dynamically dispatch to full documentation and return that instead. The other thing that makes Execode special is that it's super token efficient, and so it'll use fewer tokens and provide better grounding to your LLM. So all of these LLMs all of these other context tools use about 10,000 tokens, and Execode achieves better performance using about 1,000 tokens. So that's pretty cool. So like, why is this? Well, since code examples are all you need, Execode only returns those, and it strips all of the other context away. So the other tools will include all of the writing in the documentation, and then artifacts of like a web parser, so like the nav bar and a bunch of extra links. And Execode removes all of those and only returns a perfect code example showing what your LLM should do. And this makes it super token cheap, and you can call it a bunch for all of your tasks. So you really should be calling it for everything. And so it's in our MCP. It's a new tool, and you can call it by prompting for use Execode in your prompt, and that'll trigger the LLM to use the tool. It should use it automatically too, but it's a bit finicky. Imagine if your LLMs never hallucinate. You can achieve that ideally using Execode. Thank you. So it's available in the MCP. You can check the docs, and that's how you can use it. Are there any questions?
How do you handle like version?
Versioning. So that's all handled by the neural retrieval algorithm. So like each code snippet has a version of the library that it's from. So like for Next.js, there's different documentation for all the different major versions. And so usually your LLM will include like the version in its query, and then that will uprank the right code examples for the version.
How do you become so great?
Work at Exa. Exa will make you great. All right, that's it. So now I guess there's a MCP discussion panel. Thank you.
I think next we have a quick panel discussion around MCP, use cases, challenges in production. I think we have Rohit. I think we can just pull the chair.
Yeah, we can have a quick discussion on MCP. Are you folks using MCP in production right now? Yeah. What MCP servers are you using? Kubernetes MCP. Okay.
What's the biggest use case for that? Spinning up new clusters, managing existing?
Usually around infra provisioning and also
Yeah.
Any GitHub MCP tool you use?
Yeah, that would be. I guess I have a question. What do you think about so MCP servers? Yes, they should be remote. No one should use local MCP servers that they run on them. And what do you think about remote MCP clients? Because that's actually the next question. Because let's say MCP client is there. So sometimes you were able to have a complex application, and then you work on all the from local MCP clients. What I think with remote MCP client, because that's where this is going, because that's where OpenAI response, request. Response is not one, it's a remote MCP client. But it's like tools and it executes like the constant agent.
So I think this is almost part of that shift left strategy with most AI providers, where they're like, hey, the chat completions endpoint is fairly restrictive. How can we do a little bit more? Which is, and the chat completions endpoint, if you remember the first time it came out, seemed magical, right? I don't need to do token by token response anymore. I don't have to manage those responses. It's already in a chat format, etc. Which was an abstraction over the tokenized, the token-based LLMs that already exist. I think this is another abstraction over, where this will almost become standard, where you're now making requests to agentic endpoints managed by AI providers. So I think that is almost an inevitable future, where MCP servers get connected into AI providers, or I mean, that's what even Porky is doing now with MCP connectors. And even other applications, we'll see a lot more of this, where MCP servers are getting baked into the chat completions agent directly.
I have a question for Mohan. You looked at that architectural diagram where there's a lot of LLMs and vector data stores in there and AI gateway center, but where are you currently, or you already have an MCP strategy, and you already started building MCP servers?
Yeah, so MCP I think is a fantastic so like everybody was trying to learn generative AI, and it became very curious to start developing an application. When MCP came, everybody wanted to start with MCP. But the complexity is more into making sure that the environment is secure. It became an issue like a supply chain. Can I trust that the MCP server I'm going to start using from third party? Can I trust? They didn't bring any visibility into my environment. So that's what a bigger discussion. But yes, our developers, they started experimenting with the MCP servers more later. So what we are focusing right now, the use case we have, we are building our MCP server. So that's what we are doing right now. But if you want to start using, third-party applications, you have to go into supply chain assessment.
When you say evaluations are important and security obviously important, interesting to know from your term that you have Prisma Air since getting very popular, but it's more on the LLM side. We already have started working or have thoughts on, are there going to be guardrails for MCPs, and yes, and how do they look like?
Yes. So we're doing a couple things in this space with regards to MCP. So when platforms offer a deterministic way of hooking into MCP, we can be there with our API intercept platform. So we can do a pre-tool scan and a post-tool scan. So we can also do a prompt before it gets to the LLM and triggers those tools, and the response as well. So typically with the LLM sandwich that you're familiar with, you can also do that with each tool call as well, pending that the platform that you're building your MCP in has that ability. So Porky does with the MCP gateway, code, for example, hooks that we can also use. So we can scan the pre and post tool use. For example, the reason I brought up GitHub is a very common MCP tool where you can potentially pull malicious code, or there's a malicious URL within the repository, potentially even a prompt detection, right? That if the LLM completed, essentially nefarious things will happen. So we can do the prompt scan, pre-tool use scan, post-tool use scan, and then response scan as well.
I mean, isn't there any concerns of when you have to do this pre-tool and post-tool scan, and you would maybe get access to any data, because that MCP gateway or Claude has access to execute those tools as well. So I mean, that auth is present in the gateway. Will you be able to do these pre-cool and pre-scans and post-scans without actually getting into pulling the context, or it's more about just the tool that
So the only time we get the context is actually in the posting step. So when you say GitHub fetch me this repository, we pretty much just see the GitHub URL. So, okay, is that what we're interested in? That's roughly the only thing we're looking at. Now when it comes back down, the README all the file contents, yes, we're seeing everything. As URL, as we pass the office. So it's fully in line. We see pretty much everything that Yale would see, unless Prism Airs would block it. Partner change.
Coming back to that gateway thing, so it's really good to ask questions like with you like this, but when we have this routing strategy that's when we're talking about reliability, do you folks see these things happening in MCP as well? There's a primary stack MCP server that goes down to the, you can fall back to some other MCP server. Is that something that would happen?
I think not for, I would imagine maybe not for servers like Slack or GitHub because those are single services. But I can imagine there's like high availability when you're hosting your own MCP servers. I mean, I'm sure when PG&E is building their own servers and you're deploying it, you might want to have some amount of availability across those servers. And how can you sort of fall back or load balance across them? So that might be one of those things. But I'm guessing MCP servers are more about how do I connect proprietary data sources to my LLM requests more effectively. So an MCP itself is becoming this nice agent where a lot of the AI agents are just, that I'm seeing at least in production, are just becoming LLM calls, tool call, LLM call, and answer. And that tool call is just an MCP powered tool call, which makes my agent just maybe 6 times if I've written my servers correctly. But yeah, I mean, if you've got any more stuff to add.
I think you probably remember my initial discussion with you whenever I was talking about like how we can connect to data. So in my architecture, my platform architecture, I will talk about how to connect any data wherever it is. So MCP is providing the way how we can connect. And then when Ayush was asking about routing to other MCP server, so it goes back like just like LLMs, right? Someone in my team asked me a question, how do we tackle with the scaling, right? Because if I'm using an Anthropic LLM from Bedrock itself provides some rating, right? So even though I have like 10 accounts, from the same reason doesn't give me any benefit because the Bedrock limited is per account and there is only one endpoint in the reason, right? Now, Anthropic being available on Azure Foundry also, they announced today, right? So if that's the case, then in my application, using AI Gateway, I can build the fallback to Azure Anthropic one, right? So that gives me more resiliency in my architecture. Same way I'm thinking about MCP server too. Right? So my data source could be in Azure, could be in AWS. Maybe down the line I'm keeping a copy in my multi-cloud environment where I'm thinking about more resiliency. It's the same data set which is required in the application hosted in Azure. Somewhere I'm moving the data, even though I'm not very fond of moving the data, but for some reason I'm doing it, and my application requires in Azure. So I should have a way to see provide that option, right? It's just more like, I don't think it's like a very regular use case, but it could become very good use case in terms of thinking about resiliency, overall resiliency for the application.
Rohit, was that a big value proposition for your team in the early days as well, and still to this day, in terms of fall back to a different element, test one versus the other on the same call, be in the same application, and see the differences in output and performance?
Absolutely. I mean, imagine when GPT-5 launches, can you test GPT-5 on 5% of the traffic and then roll it out to...
That's A/B testing you can do. Yeah.
So we are already doing that.
Yes.
So one good example is LLM as a judge. Right, where the team is using Cohere for embedding, then they are using Nova for LLM judge. The main model is Claude, So it's already there. Now, when I was talking like one application probably you won't see, but if you are building a very complex application, you might find that, but I was talking about the cost as well. We all know that nobody is, most cost effective right now. Right? So maybe if my answer can get out of nowhere, and I want to build that. Maybe one portion of my application is better working with Nova, other portion of my application is better suited for cloud, maybe down the line Grok or some other model. So I have that choice. I'm not just stuck with one LLM. So that's a kind of framework, that's a kind of mindset I'm bringing so that they are free of thinking about I'm just stuck with one model, and which is actually happening right now. So one organization in our, we have access to OpenAI models, and there are some use cases are coming in where they think that OpenAI model is not providing the solution, the right solution they're looking for. Now they're just stuck because they did not have a way of connecting to another LLM. Now I'm working with a team and they're trying to see if we can connect to the code key and I can be more open. Now try with any LLM that you want. For it could be anything, I don't care. Which one you like, right? You like Power Automate, you like Founder. But if you are going to get on the backend, you have a bunch of LLMs that you can try your answer.
From a pure question, very curious to understand from a pure networking lens, do you see MCPs very different from regular REST APIs? Like, do you feel that the whole networking has to bring in few newer components or new ways of connecting? And if let's say all the communications or all the data exchanges are happening over the same protocol and REST APIs, I mean, it's still working on the same, more or less same protocol, but do you see any changes that happening with Palo Alto?
That's an interesting question. I think from a network perspective, nothing's really changed, right? You can't reach those REST APIs regardless. You won't be able to in an MCP fashion. So I think that kind of remains the same. I like to think of MCPs as a wrapper around REST. That's really just it. And you can choose which ones are available and which ones are not, which is, in my opinion, from a security perspective, a godsend from an MCP implementation perspective, right? You don't give access to all of Slack or all of Jira, just the API points that user needs, etc. So I think in some ways, MCP allows for a scoping of API endpoints that a typical API token would not within most RBAC controls. Right? A lot of SaaS applications will give you 5 or 6 default roles and that have various sets of permissions and APIs that you can call.
But don't you think it's the same thing? Like,
Correct.
whoever wrote that API with RBAC is mostly going to write an MCP server, mostly be a wrapper of those APIs in some way?
Yes, but within the MCP context, you can still pare it down. So you can have the admin credential basically call the LLM and say, I want to make this tool call out to Prisma or Palo Alto. But if only 5 API endpoints are available, you won't be able to add users, even if you're an admin, you have the admin level credential, if that API is not available to you through MCP. So I think MCP actually provides, in some ways, a layer of security that isn't really thought about a lot in terms of paring down REST API endpoints to just what that an LLM should be able to do with it. Because there's likely a lot of administrative API endpoints that a lot of organizations might not be comfortable with an LLM to carry out.
What tools to expose gives you that additional layer of abstraction? You may not want to, expose all the tools. Like if you have 100 REST APIs, you don't create one-on-one tools for them, but you can just have maybe 10 tools that are exposed.
Yes, and obviously with remote MCP servers, that is not up to us, that is up to the vendor. But for any self-hosted implementation, that I think is an approach that a lot of organizations, we're seeing some organizations take that approach, paring down what would be available out of all of their set of API endpoints. It's a very small subset of what they're allowing to MCP.
See, that another, I don't know whether we have a solution, but so I think like my MCP is connecting to a database, right? So I more look like, think about that it's like a JDBC or ODB connection that is providing a way to connect to the database. But now within my database, my data sets, the authorization to my data set, it depends on what you do this. I might have access to all the data, but then other person, because I'm talking about the PI data or the restricted data, there might be certain individuals, they will have access to that and others may not. So at the MCP level, when we make the connection, it's all there, we have public guardrails and you can do it. But when it comes to user data set, that's a permission level. I think most of the organizations, even pretty busy and are pretty very comfortable to open MCP to like all the users. Because if I build my agentic AI application, my AI agent, one agent will work on behalf of you, one got me, one got you, and we all three have different permissions. And we don't want to expose the data to the within the order I'm talking about, right? To the person who is not authorized to see it.
Yeah, the identity and permission set problem is a very interesting one that customers obviously ask security vendors about all the time. And it depends on the application. Right? Do you want your agent to have full scope to your Salesforce database and then get pared down based on the user calling it? Or should the agent have basically no access whatsoever and only on behalf delegated by the user? It really depends on the organization's appetite, what the data set you're accessing is. But we're seeing both of those patterns emerge.
We talked about security and access control around MCP and what you mentioned. Co-networking there remains more or less the same. But do you see any changes on the other side of things, like the telemetry, monitoring, when it comes to MCPs?
I think we're seeing it become a little more complex. You have agents that are now branching into MCP servers, MCP servers themselves calling LLMs back, requesting for data. So monitoring an agent run with MCP servers and AI models is definitely becoming messy. So I think I'm sure there's more interfaces that evolve that let developers like us to view how my agent ran. When did it pause? When did it ask for human input? And then how did it finally arrive at an answer? I think that's going to be interesting. It's no longer a linear or a hierarchical flow of data. We're seeing all sorts of things, and obviously that's something that we've still not solved at Portkey, but it'll be interesting to see what is this newer interface for this multi-turn agentic conversation with humans and computers.
I think it becomes a lot more interesting when you see an agent session also has its own temporary memory, and then the outputs and verdicts from these guardrails play a big role on how it is going to branch further or which route it's going to take. I think the telemetry for all of this, something still needs to be solved. Awesome. Any questions from the audience, please?
Yeah, it's like another question. Like, I think the discussion, like agent to agent, what do you think? Is it MCP? Is it API? Is it something else?
Well, it could be H2A.
Agent to agent.
Yes. So there's a couple different protocols around there. MCP obviously one of the most popular. I don't think it's. I haven't gone too deep in the weeds in terms of like the protocol differences, but I don't think it changes much in terms of whether a human calls it or an agent calls it. I think everyone's looking for that same observability and control. It's just a matter of whether it's event-driven via human clicking enter or an agent forwarding on the request.
I felt the A2A protocol was a clean implementation, but because MCPs gained so much popularity and they've added elicitations and sampling within the MCP protocol itself, I'm imagining more teams start to offer agents as an MCP tool call, which just makes sense because now MCPs can call other MCPs, and that just becomes the way agents communicate with each other as well. So that could be potentially how it evolves. It might not be as clean in the beginning because an agent's supposed to make tool calls, but the tool call is also an agent in itself. How does it delegate back? But I'm sure these constructs will just evolve and clean up over time because end of the day, as responses API is now an agentic API. It's an agent that you're calling. And you can easily map a responses API behind an MCP tool call as well. So there's a lot of these architecture patterns that will evolve, but I would bet on MCP winning this because of its wide adoption across the provider network and across enterprises as well.
And I think I read somewhere maybe the MCP can call an agent too. So that's kind of the different architecture that is being explored right now. In my mind, like now how I'm looking at we can build is like looking at there could be multiple agentic frameworks within the organization. We cannot stick to one. And the reason is like the bigger organizations, they're already set up for multiple platforms, and those platforms are already offering their own AI platform solutions. So, for example, SAP is doing its own, Salesforce is doing its own, Snowflake is doing its own, and all that, right? So, it will be very difficult to bring all of them out of their platform. There might be some reason to stick to their platform itself. Not like you probably want to restrict the development, how much you want to do, you need to have a policy for that. But when they start building it, then we need a way to bring all those agents to talk to each other. So there might be another application at the high level, at the enterprise level, that might want to talk to an agent running on Snowflake, get the output and try to get the data from SAP, and then do something with the data. Maybe just comparing the data, for example, right? So I'm seeing it could happen at this layer. It's very simple architecture. And then MCP calls will happen for certain tools that you have built or certain other services that you want to access in between. So that's the simplest architecture. But it's going to be multiple frameworks, multiple agents running across. I'm seeing like, maybe I'm going to have agents per domain, right? So if you look at your business domain in your organization, all domains will have their own agents, multiple agents. But from the enterprise level, they all need to talk to each other. So A2A is a good protocol when you can have agents to talk to each other, and MCP is that is the way to empower your agents to work better.
But A2A and MCP are they're converging so quickly in their spec. It'll be interesting if they start competing, because you also have now ACP
from IBM.
Yeah, ACP is also coming. So yeah, it'll be interesting. This will be a good fight for the next 6 months before we just standardize on how agents call other agents, because the latest research papers are coming out saying, oh, multi-agent systems don't work. So we're probably going through that trough of, oh, this doesn't work, and then there'll be some sanity on how they work together. But that's the phase we're in right now.
Awesome. Yeah, please go.
Have you guys worked on real-time providers with some user content? I'm not asking like each tool can connect to different systems, and also the same thing. Have you guys worked on what frameworks, what
So generally, the reasons you would do this is for canary testing or real-time A/B testing, where you're running the same prompt through multiple providers or multiple models. The reason to do it would be only like you're testing a newer version of something and you want to make sure nothing breaks. And there's like, if you're doing it on the SDK level, then you can just make parallel requests. If you're doing it through an AI gateway, then the gateway will just fork the request and run both of them in parallel. So, I mean, depends on how you want to make it work. But in production, when you're doing a canary test or a A/B test, then you would delegate it to the gateway to fork your requests and then return it.
if not candidates in production,
You get both the responses back, and then the application will need to handle those two responses. So what's the use case where you would want to fork requests into two different providers?
So sometimes I see that ChatGPT for the so is there any version like this set of user prompts might this LLM might
Yeah.
so is there anything that's out there?
So I think what you're talking about is LLMs as judges. So what you do is you run them through multiple LLMs and then use a judge LLM to figure out what was the best response and then maybe serve that out to the user. And in many cases you might also, if you've seen ChatGPT, they serve two responses to you and ask you to choose which one is better. So that's them collecting data to figure out which model is performing better for which use case. I think these are all custom implementations right now, where if you're building an application, you could either leave that choice to the end user, or you could use a third LLM decide which LLM's response was better and then choose that.
But a far more common implementation that we've seen is you would do all of this before going to production. Like you would use some sort of an eval framework where you would have your golden data set, you would prompt something, send it to 10 providers, compare it with that golden data set or any other maybe guardrails or something, or figure out the winner and use that winner only in production. And then you can have some sort of an A/B test going on if there's a new model or you want to try out a new provider, maybe tweak something in the prompt. Then do that, just 5% traffic to that new configuration, 95% goes there, and you can keep switching these and keep improving the performance overall. I mean, that's the more common thing at least we see, but what Rohit mentioned, can send multiple and use a third LLM or a model as a judge, define your success criteria, and then it's going to give you a winner. That obviously works. It also adds like a double latency, because first you're waiting for all the LLMs to respond back, then you have to make another LLM call, wait for its response, and then return the answer to the client.
There's a latency, I think the cost is also.
Yes. Are there any more questions? Yeah. Sorry, I think we're gonna wrap up the panel. I think you guys can also move around freely. There's just no point sitting there. And we are here till 8. Feel free to network, ask questions to any one of us. Please have some snacks, beverages, pick up some snacks from here. But yeah, I think that's much better rather than just you folks having sit there and
We can come closer and
yeah.
just chat.
Awesome. No, thank you everyone.